points would bring little. There was little food, and first priority went to the sick and wounded in the hospitals. This big new building had been Cologne's best hospital, assigned by A.M.G. to take care of Allied wounded. This one, second least harmed by battle, went to displaced persons, to all whom the Nazis tortured and enslaved or starved, like this Polish woman. The other hospitals, bombed and wrecked, went to sick German citizens, and A.M.G. ordered them to isolate their typhus cases in them quickly. A.M.G. had no medical supplies to spare the Germans, hardly enough for the anti-Nazi sick, so the wrecked drugstores of the city were stripped under strict A.M.G. supervision for drugs and medicines with which Germans could minister unto themselves. Slowly and painfully, Cologne was beginning to be a city again. One by one, as A.M.G. directed, the citizens brought its 1,000,001 functions slowly back to operation. One by one, the water mains and sewer pipes and power cables and communication systems and streetcar tracks began to operate again, as the Germans repaired the devastation which their war had brought to them. This had been a submarine cable underneath the Rhine, hidden from A.M.G. by Nazis, but revealed by the new Germans, the Germans willing to accept our peace. Above the ground, the twisted poles and broken wires which had been blasted out of service were patched and repaired so the city could have light. And though only Allied officials could use the phone, the switchboards were rewired and put to work with German operators. From the mines beyond Cologne, coal began to come again. But its destination was not German homes and stoves, for there was just enough coal coming from the earth to feed the giant generators of the city. Coal for generators which supplied power to nearby Holland and Belgium, and paid back a tiny amount of Germany's huge war debt to those nations. These are coal briquettes for furnaces, a fraction of what was needed, but all there was. In and beyond the city was the desperate snarl of transportation. The few engines and freight cars not wrecked were overtaxed beyond belief, and shipping on the river helped but little. A.M.G.'s airtight priority system had to be set up and enforced to move the endless supplies the city needed. Even worse were the nutty problems of finance. Here, a banker from Wisconsin explained A.M.G. policy to a group of pre-Hitler bankers from Cologne. Black markets, price control, the occupation mark, inflation. As trusted Germans dug German cash from the ruined vaults, A.M.G.'s job in finance was just beginning too. Physically, A.M.G.'s first steps in recreating a city had begun all at once, all together. As the Nazis cleared away the rubble here, the streetcar line began to work again there. And elsewhere, a baker found new flour to make his bread. Slow, tedious, unimpressive work. But as each edition of the Army's German language newspaper hit the street, it talked of the rebuilding life of the city, the things inside the Germans, the other part of A.M.G.'s double job. 500,000 Germans read it every day. Though they suspected it as propaganda, they could look around and see what it talked about, see what the propaganda meant, see what A.M.G. had already done. They could see Corpus Christi celebrated in front of their exquisite cathedral for the first time in 14 years. A.M.G.'s doing. The Battle of the Peace. They could see Jewish people standing again in their temples, buildings ruined not by war, but by the Nazis. They could see human beings raised again to honor and citizenship and freedom of religion under God. The things Americans had died in battle to bring back. The things A.M.G. was bringing back. The Battle of the Peace. They could see a new marble monument in a Cologne park, a monument to German dead. It was to German heroes of this war, and the inscription which they read ran like this. This is to commemorate Germany's most shameful years, 1933 to 1945. The heroes were Germans killed by Nazis in Belsen concentration camp, and their heroism had been believing against fascism and war. In dedication and in shame before it stood the Germans of tomorrow, some still in the garb of concentration camps. They were Germans who knew Germany's shame, who wanted the chance M.G. offered them to earn their future and wipe out the remnants of that shame. It was those remnants which M.G.'s open courts were vigorously prosecuting. Any and all Germans who even slightly stood in the path of the rebuilding of the city. That was part of the overhaul. Behind the bench were 3 M.G. officers, American lawyers. Before them every day came the parade of black marketers, Nazi diehards, petty crooks, the Germans who sabotaged the peace. This day, the German had been caught packing a gun. This gun, an Army Luger. This is the German sweating out a phony alibi. These are his lawyers, whom M.G. permitted to practice in its courts, provided they had never been Nazis. Here, the interpreter was a German who'd come to America when the Nazis took over Germany. Part of the procedure was the rule that testimony and the statements of the judges must be translated, so the audience can hear and understand that justice, unlike Nazi law, can be just as well as tough. Now a U.S. citizen, the sergeant is helping show this to Nazis he had hated. The verdict was guilty, the sentence hard. Germans convicted in the courts were sent here, the grimmest building in the city. This is Klingelputz, the forbidding former Gestapo prison and torture house, curiously untouched by war. But as M.G.'s prisoners climbed down in front of Klingelputz, suddenly the immensity of M.G.'s job in this or any German city is symbolized by another prisoner, a cocky little Aryan Superman. Like thousands of his countrymen, he was still infected. That's the point. He wasn't even being hypocritical or trying to pretend that he was cured. He showed off, still a 2-bit big shot in his own mind, even here in prison under M.G. guard, and with a decent, respected German questioning him. He was still a Nazi, and always would be. Suppose M.G. hadn't caught him and kicked him into jail. And instead, he and his kind were free to wander through the city, working their cynicism against the future of these German kids. Suppose that instead of this M.G. welfare center, nothing stood as sentinel against filling these little towheads full of Nazi arrogance again, and the rumbling of German war drums for revenge. Then we would lose the battle of the peace, not only in this city and its people, but in the world. For it's here, with German children who are too young to remember, sitting in the sun, that you can hear the sound of German future and the future of us all. The dirty rubble of defeat, the aftermath of a war their German parents brought them. These German boys had 2 things burning brightly in their future. 1, it is they who will inherit the day of the atomic bomb, when another war would end the world. 2, in the bonfires M.G. has started for them, to burn out the infection of their past, lies their only chance. It's M.G.'s fight to the finish. It's M.G.'s battle of the peace. Without it, would the war be finally won?